Hello, this is a video talking about Chaos Zero and kind of the state of the game, given myself a notepad. I also have another notepad with all my other notes on it, but the notepad was mostly here in case I wanted to write something in there. So, the one thing that I wanted to say was that there's a dev note, and I think the new upcoming sortie mode looks like it will be fun. Probably for people who are playing for the purpose of the roguelike. I can imagine that this mode will be fun, or just in general as like a new and interesting way to interact with the game. And that's sort of why I wanted to make this video, just for the record. But yeah, I'm still recovering a little bit from being sick, so I apologize if my voice is a bit not all there. And I guess, yeah, I just sort of wanted to talk about my experience with the game and sort of where I see it at right now. I'm not really sure. I just kind of had a bunch of thoughts and then felt like a potpourri style video where I just talk about it as maybe interesting. I'm not sure. But I suppose one of the things that I can comment on is evidently the videos regarding the roguelike mode aren't particularly engaging, which I think is relatively unsurprising to me. I think the run content itself is not immensely engaging. Maybe like the design of roguelikes in general, because I think roguelikes are very, very interesting because they ask you to react a lot to randomness. And this is a particularly fun part of games in general. Probably the best way to have someone make decisions is to have some degree of randomness. There will be some degree of randomness somewhere, usually in a game, such that a player playing the game needs to respond to that. Whether that's like a sport, and then the randomness is sort of like the strategy that the enemy team decides to initiate, or like how you are feeling on that day, your mental capacities when you are making any kind of maneuver, whether that be a shot, the results of your training, the randomness of all that is a part of the game. And then how you respond to that, how you decide to execute and continue making game decisions is what is fun about games a lot of the time. So I guess in a actual game example, that's something like the monster patterns or boss patterns in an action RPG would be the randomness in those games, and then obviously roguelikes have that randomness and with how the enemies act. But roguelikes are interesting because they present to you a random amount of options, and that is interesting because in many game structures, the options that are available to you are usually consistent, and also generally they go up over time. Like the strength of your character in RPG and the tools that are available to you become stronger over time, and you elaborate on a strategy, and then it usually becomes quite solidified towards the end of the game. And then in a basic narrative game, you would have learned all you learn throughout that one playthrough of the game, provided that is the only run that you're doing. But in a roguelike, you have to respond to the randomness of, in this case, like the epiphanies that you get, or what paths are available to you, and then you're constantly making decisions between, like, am I fighting enemies or going to events or whatever, what have you. And that is facilitated because you have to replay the run. You can replay a run starting at level 0 or whatever you want to call it, with no abilities, and obviously people find that quite appealing. Interestingly, I actually have two friends. I don't know why I wanted to talk about them, but yeah, I only have two friends. Awesome. I have two friends who don't play roguelikes. And it's interesting to me because they express like this idea of like it's not fun to like lose progress, basically. That's sort of how they see it. There's some combating of that with the roguelite formula, obviously, but there's kind of this idea of when playing a roguelike or light, whatever. I'm just going to continue with roguelike for the rest of the video. You're losing progress. That's kind of like a sentiment that some players have, and maybe why they don't like playing roguelikes is because they'll get to the end of the run and they will like lose their progress, and then they have to like start all over again. They're like, why did I bother participating or playing this game? And I think that the premise of Chaos Zero released with this interesting idea, which is save data. And other games have done this before. There's also like Uma Musume, lets you like train your horses effectively by playing the game, and then you keep whatever the horse is, or parent or something, to run in a race. And it's just being able to take like a little memento with you after the run. So, you know, you play a run with Barrel, and then you discover opening found, and then you can retain a bunch of cards in your hand, and then you're like, oh, I can save this deck, and then I can keep that because you had such a sweet run. And then you get to take that with you and then execute on that strategy in other places, with the obvious implication that as you get better at the game, you can make better decks, and then, you know, take those into the outward content, other content, and then use it somewhere. So I think that on face value, that is a very interesting idea, because it sort of combats this initial resistance or friction to wanting to play a roguelike, which is that like you literally can save that progress and take it with you to do something else. The problem with it is that it kind of makes a tension between like what is the game about. So we already saw a little bit of this friction in Season 1. Personally saw a little bit of that friction going into Season 2. And then evidently there's like stuff in the dev message about addressing player burnout and stuff like that, and save data convenience farming features, which are all like great, awesome that those are available. The tension is that it just brings up a lot of design questions, like how do we balance the numbers, basically? So if a player is expected, let's say, in a roguelike to perform at 70% of their maximum capacity in order to win the game, which is like, in my opinion, not unreasonable. Like if you are playing 70% of the capability of the system, that's like quite a lot of the system. And then, you know, you win a certain percentage of the time based on your application of your skill within that 70% range of understanding the system. That's like maybe reasonable. 70% is kind of like a made-up number, but you're not expected to be like completely perfect, because making, first of all, knowing what the correct decision is, or making the correct decision on like the floors 1 through 5 of a roguelike, which I didn't really want to talk about Slay the Spire too much in this video. I was thinking of avoiding it entirely, but because I'm going to make an analogy, I feel like it's reasonable to discuss it. It's basically impossible for you to know what the absolute 100% correct decision is for the first, let's say, like 5 floors, and then like, let's say 10 to 15 floors of whatever roguelike is. Like, what is the perfect, if I could see 100% to the future, what gives me like 100% win rate from this point in the game? It's a little muddy, and that is interesting because you kind of just make decisions that you think are good and then deal with the consequences of those decisions, and then sort of meander forward. And then there are mechanisms for like, if your deck is kind of behind, then you want to rest more and then like heal your HP, and then maybe a good way to get more momentum for your deck is to like fight an elite or something like that. In Cesian's case, you would get a monster card. And then there's a bunch of like that interplay going on. And then the system is fairly flexible in letting you explore that question so that you don't need to make perfect decisions. So I was talking about like what is the true gameplay, like how do you balance this stuff? So let's say you have to play like the 70% capacity in order to get to be moderately successful in the roguelike, like winning, let's say like 30 to 50% of your runs in like a very, very difficult roguelike. That's actually pretty good, honestly. So like you'd balance the game towards those numbers, right? Like only 70% capacity, like you take your card draw epiphany when you find it because it's probably pretty good, and then and stuff like that. And maybe there's some techniques for like sandbagging when you get your epiphany, like prioritizing events in the latter part of Act 1. So you can find specific events, and then maybe like dodging encounters after you've gotten all of your card epiphanies. After you've gotten all your card epiphanies on a character, maybe trying to avoid fights so that you're not triggering an epiphany that like you didn't want to trigger. Stuff like that. Some higher level strategy stuff that you could be applying to the game in order to get a little bit more leverage or advantage. This is also stuff like when farming save data was a little bit harder, stuff like including uniques in your deck. These are like higher level play things that you could be doing in order to be getting advantage, although that is more towards farming better save data. So the point here being that the game does not expect you to perform perfectly. And what I'm trying to tie this into is that, like, we have the Great Rift. We have the boss modes that do not have to do with the roguelike, and then you ask yourself, like, okay, well, how do I balance the game with the expectation that players can potentially make, like, 0 to 4 card decks, which only have cantrips and stuff like that, or potentially up to, like, 13 plus energy per turn, potentially up to like the maximum stack of modifiers that a character can potentially get in one turn or every single turn after their deck is gone. Like, how exactly do you balance the roguelike mode with the thought that that is actually potentially possible in the roguelike mode? You know, maybe not to that extent, because obviously you need like 9 dupes or something. Like that just like doesn't exist in the roguelike mode. But there are features like rerolling epiphanies, or perhaps like card duplicating is still there. So if you have 4 opening founds on a barrel, like that is a pretty insane amount of damage for most things that you'd be fighting. So there's just like some questions about like balancing character numbers in order to make that successful, and also there's questions for the balance between understanding that players who want to extract the save data want particular convenience features, and that realistically that all features that make it easier to play the roguelike mode in any capacity will make it easier and less challenging, which means that the roguelike mode is not as fun anymore. And I think the obvious answer to this thing that I'm saying is that, well, the sorting mode is coming out. Is that we are getting a game mode that is solely the roguelike and has no save data attached to it. You know, you could be one way or the other about like, well, this is a game about farming save data, or, well, this is supposed to be a roguelike game, and then, like, that's what it was supposed to be, why isn't it doing that? And I think realistically understanding the downsides of both of those things for, you know, people who simply want to farm save data, like making the game particularly difficult would, you know, make the game unplayable for them. A player who wants the roguelike to be difficult, if it was easy, which in my opinion that's where the state of the roguelike is at right now, if the game is too easy and there are too many convenience features, then that like really removes basically all of the challenge from playing that game mode. And I think it's my opinion that the numbers are clearly balanced towards making the game easy enough that you can extract with save data with a high degree of consistency. Even so much so that they are propositioning to add an item that auto-combats for you and literally skips encounters, which I think is, like, hilarious, honestly, to be completely honest with you. That's wild that that's even, like, an option, because it's effectively saying, like, well, your gear can be so good that you can go into a run of the roguelike mode and just like extract, basically. So kind of completely undermining any illusion, basically, that there's challenge in the roguelike mode. And I understand that I'm saying this, and realistically, if you go back and watch the randomizer runs that I've done, like, I've lost a lot. But I do want to say that I think that bringing a synergistic team into the chaos is actually, like, pretty important. So I did the randomizer runs with the thought of, like, discovering interesting little synergies and synergy spaces, and that's kind of true that those exist, but usually they aren't as powerful as just bringing, like, Tefera 9 into the chaos where things are weak to order damage. I do want to say that I think it's interesting the changes that they brought to Season 2, where they kind of tried to strike a balance between these two things, like introducing shop rerolls. I think there's only 3. Then making stuff like rest sites have the meditation mechanic, which realistically can add to the depth of a standard roguelike run, but also help players who want to extract with the save data actually extract with the right save data. So that's all well and good. I do, however, think at the moment that, like, save data runs aren't particularly engaging to interact with. I personally found that when I was more actively farming save data, my team was basically 9 plus whoever I wanted to farm for, which was like 9 could effectively beat Chaos 8 by herself, and then, like, probably having a support was a good idea. But the person who you're actually getting your, like, dupes or epiphanies on would sit in that 3rd spot, and they don't even necessarily need to be effective at doing anything. So you could play, like, one of the higher difficulties of the game, or at least the one where the save data is mostly kept out at, to my understanding. Might actually be 9, now that I think about it. With one character. So that's an interesting thing to think about when we're talking about the percentage chances and strategic thinking depth that is required for a traditional roguelike, that we're effectively not using 2/3 of the game systems to help us win. And obviously the reason that was the case was that we wanted to have easier time farming save data, and then the players who wanted to farm save data got that convenience for them. And then the end game became very, very focused around Great Rift and, you know, scoring as high as you could in Great Rift. And I sort of had some issues with that system existing, because one of the more interesting things in Chaos Zero to me, again, is, like, those interesting mini synergies that you can find. Like, one of the synergies that I found recently, I was going to say thought of, but I literally didn't think of it. It happened randomly in one of my runs. I was like, wow, that's really cool. I don't think that does anything, but it was using Amir's Metalize and Narja's gain defense multiple times epiphany, and that triggers Amir's Metalize multiple times, which is very interesting. So the Amir deck could solely focus on making a bunch of Metalize, and then all the stacks kind of get popped with Narja. And that deck obviously is never going to do anything competitive at all in Great Rift. I actually don't even think it'd be able to clear the content. But sort of the design of Great Rift, you know, I want to say that I think it is a very reasonable and keen designer thing to notice that, well, the Great Rift is going to perform better probably with the units that are coming out at the time, as that's kind of the point. But then it, like, becomes really awkward to say, like, well, we sort of want to have a fun experience for players to play the second phase of the boss, but realistically it's nigh unplayable for certain strategies. Like, maybe you just really liked Serenial. I really like Serenial, just for the record. and she's basically unplayable in Phase 2. But I would say that there's a lot of modern game design that has to do with accommodating basically most of the tools that you put in the game. So it's kind of like a design philosophy lens to say that, well, if I include, let's say, a very aggressive play style that runs in like guns blazing, and then maybe like a stealth gameplay style, and then maybe like a mix of both of those things, then you end up with this like, I'm going to cognizantly be aware of the fact that this level could be played in all those three ways, and then you'll have fun moments for all of those types of ways to do stuff. I guess the other way you could see this is a game like Baldur's Gate 3, where it feels like it responds very well to a lot of the things that you want to do. And then you're kind of surprised when you kill a party member at the start of the game and then revive them, and they're like, you know, that was an interesting thing that you did, and I honestly respect you for reviving me after beating my ass, which is like a very funny thing for a Astarion to say after you kill him and he was hostile. So yeah, like the game understands, or rather the game designers understand, that there are several things that players may want to do, and then accommodate things that can happen in the game for all of those playstyles. And then the problem is that I want to say a lot of gacha design. I actually wrote a small paper, not very academic. It's more like a, journal reflection on the observation that this happened a very long time ago in Genshin. That the Abyss sort of had this same idea going on where, obviously the new benefits, the new characters would benefit the most from whatever the seasonal bonus is. And I have some hesitations about the existence of that system at all, basically. But it is what it is at the end of the day. I just think that at its core, that what CZN was proposing to me was that it was sort of like an anime roguelike deck builder. I sort of found myself thinking, oh, maybe like the synergy space isn't actually that, there isn't actually a whole lot of depth. So that's unfortunate. And then I was like, oh, well, there's still decisions to be making, and like you do still sort of need to learn the fights, which you do, to be completely fair. It's unfortunate that realistically the strategic depth of the game is not really there, in my opinion, as hopefully evident by saying I can walk into chaos with 9 and she just kills everything. That's unfortunate, because you potentially have the system where you can go into a very engaging roguelike game mode with 3 characters who you like. Presumably it has access to synergies that you enjoy, and then go like, yeah, I'm gonna run it back. I'm gonna see if we can just win a difficult and engaging run of a roguelike deck builder and see what happens. Yeah, I guess it is to say just that my gripe about the design of the Great Rift is that it feels like the types of strategies that you can bring into the Great Rift are hyper-specific, and that the literal design of the game mode is not conducive to players playing creatively, basically. So, shout out to all the people who bust out their spreadsheets and like crunch the numbers and look for like interesting ways to increase their damage and stuff like that. I think that that's valid, just for the record. But I do want to say that, I picked up the game because I thought it was going to be Anime Slay the Spire, and also that I stopped playing Uma Musume when the core gameplay loop became about farming PvP horses, and that just wasn't particularly interesting to me. I think the literal issue with the design of Great Rift is that the goal is to surpass infinite points. In Phase 2, you can effectively farm infinite points with, particular fall-offs, and then there becomes all kinds of different levels of metagaming strategies of like, well, if the soft cap hits around here, and then like, can you rubber band the soft cap, and then like, can we deal damage to ourselves to get more points off of healing, to have more energy, to activate more cards, and then looking for silly stuff like Tressa Cassius. The goal of the mode is to get to the highest points possible. And I want it to be clear, I suppose, that I find roguelikes interesting in the sense that, as I said before, you don't actually need to play on 100% capability in order to win at a roguelike. And as far as expectations are concerned in video games in general, they actually trend more towards like kind of the middle ground of player capability. Usually with the harder stuff off to the side, like you don't have to fight Millennia Blade of Mikola if you do not want to, but it is there and it is available to people who want that challenge. And then even then, there's varying kind of like release valves, like doing co-op or simply over-leveling for an encounter and stuff like that. So that is all to say that like the realistic expectation of someone engaging with a video game is not the highest possible thing that it could possibly ever be, possibly. And I think that the issue with Great Rift Phase 2 is that it presents the idea, again, I mean, it is a PvP mode, but it does present the idea that you simply need to like farm and like break the game in half and then like get all the newest units, and then the way that you can really squeeze out the most amount of damage is having 6 copies of that unit. And then you might say that, well, there are a lot of games that are PvP that do similarly, which I will agree with, but I do think that there are slight differences. I actually think I'm going to step back even further and say, let's just talk about regular roguelikes. So I was thinking of Slay the Spire, and then I think to myself, well, making the perfect decision at any point in time is something that I've already discussed, but also that I find the game very interesting because like I'm not sitting there thinking for like 10 minutes on my turns of what the absolute best possible thing that I can do is. I sort of just play very lackadaisically because that's what's fun for me, and then sometimes I win and sometimes I don't, and then I think realistically there are some aspects that I could improve on which I think would improve my win rate, but the game isn't asking me to do that all the time. It is not the end goal of the game to get to floor 50 and then I need to deal 3 billion damage to the boss or whatever, which funnily enough there were ways to do that with like stacking the replay card or whatever. But when you make a system that encourages you to get, again, the highest points possible, then what you are effectively asking the player base to do is to really optimize to that 18th percentile, which is kind of annoying. It's kind of frustrating, honestly, because I think that a more open system allows people to play kind of creatively with elements that are maybe like suboptimal. So like maybe there's a card that you simply just like picking a lot. So like you'll pick that card a bunch and then you like playing with that card, and then realistically it doesn't cost you the run to pick that card relatively consistently because it is a card that you are familiar with using and stuff like that. So if I think of a game like Genshin, this is now kind of gacha game to gacha game, I think of something like Spiral Abyss, and then you go, well, Spiral Abyss is solvable with a lot of things. Like you can cap out on rewards with like basically anything. you can cap out on rewards with playing one character. And now we kind of like cross the threshold back into, well, is the game too easy and stuff like that, which it's not really my opinion. It's been a long time since I played Genshin, but not really my opinion that that is the case in that game. But it is worth noting that Spiral Abyss's expectation of what you are capable of doing is completing it within a certain amount of time. Like, finish this task that we want you to do, like this arena fight, boss fight, whatever, in a certain amount of time. And tuning that number, like how much time, right? On the design side, like saying beat this boss in 3 minutes, or beat this boss in 3 minutes and 30 seconds, or beat this boss in 4 minutes, whatever, that is a design lever that you are allowed to adjust in order to say things that are capable of achieving this are viable, are things that you can do. And then it gives players space to think of, well, I can bring like this super good meta team and then, you know, clear it like well below the required time and stuff like that. Or sometimes you're like, well, can I make this healer a DPS? Is always like a fascinating question to ask yourself. I know I posted Ray trying to do damage, which was absolutely hilarious at the time to myself. And even Selena, who was commonly touted as a sub DPS, or frankly just functions better in that role, to be completely honest with you, doing that for fun. And I think that if there was a timer-based system where the goal was the timer, where there is a design lever that is being adjusted such that you might be able to play someone like Owen. I don't know who wants to play Owen, but, you know, a mode where optimizing Owen to beat a boss in 5 turns is valid. Something like that. And it's actually why I like the first phase of Great Rift a lot more than the second phase, because it does do that where it gives a goal that is theoretically solvable with a lot of different things. And you can optimize for it. Like, you can bring Serenial into that fight and simply smack it upside the face in phase 1, barring any kinds of restrictions that the boss presents. Like, you can bring someone and like beat it on turn 1 or whatever. Sure. But because, again, the goal isn't highest number which beats other people's highest number, like let's say that it is a goal or a desire of a player to get into Diamond, right? The goal that you are incentivizing for the player is to hit the highest number, which is maybe something that I want to write down. I think that kind of summarizes what I wanted to say. I had to change the size on the notepad, unfortunately, regrettably. But yeah, like when you have a goal that is kind of more open, like interestingly, the goal in a game like Slay the Spire is realistically just the only thing you need to do to beat the game is to have not died before floor 50 and then beaten the thing that is on floor 50. And then you would have won the game. So as long as you didn't die all the way up until that point, and then you beat floor 50, then you're good. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. A lot of different styles of play, a lot of different styles of drafting, shopping, whatever, that allow you to achieve that goal. So I genuinely, you know, this is not coming from a place of, oh, I'm super competitive, or to say that I'm jealous of the people who have like very good decks or anything like that. I recognize that I simply do not have the time to do that. Like, I don't have the time to farm 3 of the best decks on 3 of the best characters and get the RNG necessary to do that. That is not the axis that I particularly care about. So for the people who want to do that and farm save data and compare ideas at that level of play, totally good. I just wanted to showcase basically in a theoretical sense why the type of play that comes out of the late game is hit the highest number possible. Like, because that is the late game, like that is kind of the North Star for most players who are playing, because that is the end game. The game becomes about, I must farm the best save data. And I think that that is where a lot of burnout comes from. Like, burnout from feeling I must farm the best save data. And like, it's been apparent to me from the patch notes that I've read multiple times that they're like, well, we want to support players being able to have combatants be like viable And the reality is that they've simply chosen the wrong system from my genuine design perspective. Like, they have chosen the wrong system to support their ideology, because making a system that promotes you must hit the highest number possible and promotes you probably want to get the banner unit, like, the creativity is not there. Like, there's no space to be creative or have any kind of creative solution to the problem, because there is only one solution, and it is whatever the highest number is. I'm hyperbolizing a little bit because obviously there was probably a Hardu deck that was competitive. There was definitely a barrel deck that was competitive, and then obviously 9 was sort of the queen of the first half of the season, at least. First half of whatever the Great Rift was. I did not play the second half. But yes, I do think that this player burnout issue, not just from the convenience things of farming save data, it's that, like, it is necessary to do so, because the game mode promotes you to get the highest number possible. I think that it would be more interesting if there was a more of a goal-oriented approach, or a goal-oriented late game, such that there were a lot of different answers, and then people can show off their cool teams with their favorite combatants and all that stuff, and just play the game that way. Now, this is sort of where I run into some issues, and this is something that I wanted to discuss or mention, which is that who currently plays Louisiana? And I'm not asking this in a particularly facetious way. I think that the answer to this question is people who farm save data and want high Great Rift scores. I believe that this is the late game that is currently being curated for, at least before the sorting mode, because again, it's not out yet, I haven't played it, or anything like that. Who knows, it could be the greatest thing ever, whatever. I think that we had 2 seasons where a lot of the discussion and a lot of the gameplay was centered around this Great Rift late game. And that promoted people to farm a lot. It promoted people to arguably get kind of like burnt out on all of that farming, and then get those high Great Rift scores. So my concerns with implementing any kind of design change that is, like, for example, make a more goal-oriented approach. And then, just for the record, the leaderboard would, instead of being like highest possible score ever, it would just be like the most recent clears. Like, here are the 100 most recent clears of this boss, and then like 1 through 100 or 1 through 1,000, whatever. And then you can see all the, like, interesting ways that the boss got beat, and then you see a deck that's like 3 supports, and it's like, wow, there's like 3 supports beating the boss. That's really cool. How did they do that? And then you can check out their save data, and then, like, they're on there. That's there's no. It's not as satisfying, I suppose, because you can't compare highest number to each other. And again, for the people who want that, you know, Great Rift probably doesn't need to change if that was the thing that you were looking for. But again, my concern here is that if we change the design of the game to be goal-oriented, and then it's more about just, like, showing off your execution of the character, showing off, like, the fun things that you like doing on the character, like this Amir Narja synergy that I was talking about, of, like, proccing Metalize a bunch and then winning the game that way. The personal player expression of optimizing that deck and then bringing something cool that you can show to other people is certainly more casual, and I think that doesn't necessarily resonate with, like, these types of players. Right? It's unclear to me. It's unclear to me whether or not there are players who would value that. You know, there's obviously no way for me to know. So that also brings into question, would players who like save data become roguelike players? This is also unclear to me. So I'm very excited for the sorting mode, but realistically, up until this point, the roguelike has been very easy. And the stipulation of that is so that you can get save data. So the people who have been playing the game in order to farm save data are here, and then the new content does not give them save data. And then similarly, it probably also does not give them the experience of the roguelike that they've played thus far. It might be more difficult, and they might not win a lot, to be completely honest. They may not win a lot. So I have concerns about this game mode that I am excited for, and how that is going to go over with players. I can certainly predict that there are players who will leave because it is not the content that they want. And my concern about that is, are there roguelike players playing CZN? And I don't know the answer to this question either. Because I've been talking about it to probably, if it is stated in the video, a non-zero amount, that there is a direct competitor to this question out right now that people are playing a lot of, and it has sold a lot of copies. So I think that also it is a bit unfortunate and a bit of a shame that within the time that it took this game to actually finish perhaps its development, or have its development at a point where they can actually release their pure roguelike mode. This is all before I've played it, whether it's good or not good or whatever. In that time, there was a complete haymaker of another roguelike deck building game, which probably drew a lot of the players away from playing CZN. The ones, and then I think, in my honest personal opinion, that the people who maybe would have played CZN as a roguelike deck builder left, and that the people who remained so that they could get high scores in Great Rift and farm save data over and over again are the people who will not enjoy this game mode. This was sort of the initial thought of why I even wanted to record this video in the first place, was because I felt like this is an unfortunate place for CZN to be. I want to record a little bit of the new game mode, check it out, and see if it is fun. But I think that it is very unfortunate that there are, many cool character designs and deck designs and mechanic designs and all kinds of stuff like that. Like, I don't really know how to communicate this feeling that I have, but when I play games, it's sometimes evident to me when there are people who like the type of game that they made, if that makes sense. And I feel like CZN, in my genuine, honest opinion, has had a lot of interesting ideas, and there's been a lot of thought put into things that would indicate to me that these people like roguelikes, and potentially these people like roguelike deck builders, which is cool and interesting to see. And I'm glad that they can execute with their fantastic artistic flair in animating and card arts and all that stuff, and make this game that is CZN. And that I find it unfortunate that a game that seems to demonstrate that degree of passion in its creation and all that stuff might potentially jump its player base off a cliff with the release of sorting mode. Considering the fact that it is probably the most interesting piece of news that I have heard from CZN in arguably a few months. I'm hoping that in the edited cut of this video that I have discussed all the potpourri points that I wanted to talk about, sort of the expectations that games have, why I think that the initial premise of CZN and save data and all that stuff is interesting, despite the fact that it kind of makes design tension with like what part of the game is playable. That the sorting mode looks like an interesting solution to that, but unfortunately, I'm not sure if there will be players to play that game mode. Like, in my least cynical opinion, I think that there are people who will try the game mode out, and provided that it is good and fun to play, that people will enjoy it. Like, that is my non-cynical thought. But, you know, let me know. Let me know what you think. But that's it, and I'll see you probably in the next one. Bye.